The origin of life is one of the most persuasive lines of evidence for the existence of God. The next 7 minutes will show you why. Of all of the hurdles atheism and the naturalistic worldview have to overcome, there may be none bigger than this. Where does life come from? In a universe that contains solely non-living matter, how is it going to produce life? A number of naturalistic explanations have been set forth, and yet there is still no satisfactory answer for how life could have come into being. It was once believed that simple organisms could arrange themselves into living beings from non-living matter. For example, many speculated that the cells of decomposing meat might evolve into maggots, and this would be proof that living beings could generate from non-living organisms. Setting aside the fact that such an example ignored the pre-existence of living organisms like bacteria, further experimentation showed that maggots came from eggs laid by living flies. There was no special life creation happening. Life was creating more life, as it always has. Another form of this theory of abiogenesis, or spontaneous generation, said that simple organisms self-generated, like bacteria in a cup of broth. Louis Pasteur put this theory to the test through the use of his process of pasteurization, which we're well familiar with today. By boiling a flask of broth, Pasteur ensured that any germs existing within the broth would be killed. When the flask was left exposed to the air, bacteria began to appear in the broth. However, through the use of an S-shaped spout, Pasteur was able to show what would happen should the broth be protected from airborne germs. The result? No bacteria was found in the broth, proving that life was not creating itself in the broth. Once that line of thinking had been debunked, the search began for an explanation that could satisfy the need for a confluence of conditions to create life. The 1953 Miller-Urey experiment is still held up as the gold standard in this vein, as the two scientists aimed to show what they believed was possible given the right conditions. They created an artificial atmosphere of gases and repeatedly zapped it with simulated lightning. The experiment resulted in trace amino acids and was immediately held up as a triumph for life coming from non-life. To this day, many believe Miller and Urey settled the science and accept as fact that life can come from non-life, given the right conditions and enough time. Let's assume for a moment that random factors could overcome the enormous odds to make this happen in a way that can never be seen again. Even so, the experiment still does not hold up as an answer for the origin of life. First, amino acids may be the building block of life, but they are not life in themselves. To get from fragmented amino acids to a living organism is just as difficult as getting from gases to amino acids, especially when many of those amino acids come in essentially unusable forms. Miller-Urey did not create life. Second, the experiment omitted oxygen from the cocktail of elements, as they readily admitted the experiment had no chance of success if oxygen were present. The scientists justified this by claiming that Earth may not have had oxygen at the time life first came into being. This is an enormous assumption that solves one problem and raises numerous others. Studies have shown that Earth's atmosphere had to have contained oxygen from very early on. Even staunch evolutionary scientists now admit Earth would not have been oxygen-free as the experiment required. Third, Miller and Urey used a consistent stream of electricity to get their result, something that does not happen with lightning. Lightning strikes at random, not consistently. Finally, all of this overlooks a giant elephant in the room. Where did the pre-life matter come from? The entire experiment was rigged because it pre-assumed the existence of the necessary elements in chemicals like hydrogen and ammonia. In other words, Miller and Urey took the existence of matter for granted, even though self-creating matter is a scientific impossibility. In order to truly prove life came from non-life, one would have to start all the way at the beginning with nothing, then see if the nothing can become something, and then see if the something can come to life. It's with this requirement in mind that we begin to see how tall of a task atheism has before it when attempting to explain the origin of life. Atheists speak as though single-celled organisms coming to life on their own is improbable, but may be able to happen given enough time and chance. No, it is impossible. Even if given 1 trillion years and the exact conditions considered to be most favourable, life would not result. Why not? Because it can't. Life cannot come from non-life. This is an indisputable fact. one which some call the law of biogenesis. Non-living matter can neither become a living, breathing being or even a single-celled organism, nor can it give birth to such. As there is no observational evidence of life coming from non-life, and it is not a repeatable or measurable phenomenon, the claim completely fails the scientific method. Recognizing this, some resort to theories like panspermia, the idea that life arrived on Earth via organisms attached to asteroids which crashed here. This entirely dodges the question of where life came from originally. Life on Earth could have come from somewhere else, but where did that life come from? As the naturalist repeatedly attempts to answer this conundrum, they are met with dead end after dead end. Life exists today, but their worldview has not the faintest hope of ever explaining how. The true explanation of where life came from is rather simple. A living, eternal being created the life we see in the universe. This being would have no origin because he would need no origin. He would be eternal and self-sustaining, existing above the laws of nature. Put plainly, the existence of life can only be explained by the existence of a God. These are the two choices we have when seeking to explain how we are alive today. We can either assume that life exists because self-creating materials overcame enormous odds under just right circumstances to spring into life as a single cell and result in all of the biodiversity we see today. Or we can take a clue from what we observe in the world around us, and that is that life came from life. God created life and all of the beings and organisms we see. To summarize, either life originated from nothing with no intelligence to guide it, or life originated from a living, super-intelligent master engineer who created everything. Which of these choices requires the greater leap of blind faith? The biblical narrative that God created life makes the most sense because it's perfectly in line with what we see and observe. If you want to learn more about the lines of evidence that prove the biblical worldview, please visit linesofevidence.com.